Allison Schaberg from Consolidated Planning. We're very pleased and thankful to have her available today to speak to us on these important topics, which are Medicaid waivers, SSI, eligibility, and preserving benefits. And so this is some really important information, whether you're a parent or a professional person, and I'm sure you'll give her your full attention. So Allison, welcome, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Dee, for having us again. It's a pleasure to be here with you. So for a couple of housekeeping items, I always start with the housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded, and following today's event, either today or tomorrow, you will get a copy of today's slides. You will also get a copy of the recording in your email, so you can watch out for that. You don't have to take notes on every single thing because you'll have the slides. We are in webinar mode today, so we don't see you or hear you, but we do know that you're out there. And we do want to answer as many questions as possible. So do put your questions in the chat box. And oftentimes with our webinars, we do have a number of professionals that attend our webinars. So we would like to welcome all of you. We're glad you're here. We're glad you're back. And sometimes there's questions in the chat box that might be relevant to you and to your profession and kind of who you work with or kind of what your background is. So feel free to put comments in the chat box as well. So as she said, I'm Allison Schaberg, Consolidated Planning Group. I'm the owner of Consolidated Planning Group, and we are a holistic special needs financial planning firm. We do a lot of webinars from an educational perspective. And most of the topics that we chat about are all surrounding special needs and planning for our special needs loved ones. I am a mom to 4. I have 2 adult kids with special needs. So I eat, sleep, and breathe this both personally and professionally. So today what we're going to be talking about, kind of the first part of this presentation, we're going to be talking about Medicaid waivers. And, you know, Medicaid waivers is kind of this thing, you know, we hear all the time, are you in on the waiting list? Are you on the interest list? Or where are you on the list? Or is your child getting a waiver? And so I think in and around the circles that we run, we learn that as parents that our kids should be on the interest list. And so today what we're going to talk about are what are those interest lists? What are those waivers? How do we get on the list? How do we find out where we are on the list? And what do we need to do to preserve our eligibility, you know, for these waivers that come up in the future? So we're going to kind of go deep and wide on that. So when we're talking, and I know that sometimes we do actually have people that that attend our webinars that are from out of state. And just so you know, the waivers that we're talking about are Texas specific, but each state in the United States has waivers, and they're all Medicaid waivers, and they're designed. What are these waivers, and why do we have them, and what is the purpose of these waivers? And the purpose of the waivers is to waive off some of the cost of care for individuals with disabilities in order to help maintain and allow them to live in home and community-based, get home and community-based services and maybe defray some of the cost. A lot of these waivers are going provide for like attendance services, respite hours. There's a lot of different therapies that are covered by these various waivers, and there's waiting lists for almost every single one of them. And I'll talk to you about the one that there in a lot of counties in Texas there are not waiting lists. But for those attendees that might be out of state, we are going to talk about a lot of things that is not necessarily generalized to Texas that may be helpful on your journey. But you can certainly look up on the state website what waivers are available in your state, and the waiting list for your state may not be quite as long as it is in Texas. So those of you may know that the waiver list and the waiting list in the state of Texas is a pretty long waiting list. Some would suggest right now that the waiting list might be as long as 17 years. So the sooner we get our loved ones on the list, the sooner they're going to get services, but you have to know that it's going to be quite some time. So in Texas, we like acronyms. So I've kind of put some of the acronyms that these waivers are called. So we've got CLASS, the Community Living Assistance and Support Services. We've got DBMD, which is a mouthful every time, no matter who says it. This is deaf, blind with multiple disabilities. We got HCS, Home and Community-Based Services. We have Texas Home Living. We have MDCP, which is the Medically Dependent Children's Program. We have the STAR Plus waiver, also known as the 1115 demonstration waiver. We have the Youth Empowerment waiver, also known as the YES waiver. And then we have Community First Choice. So the next couple of slides, we're just kind of going to give a brief overview of what each of these waivers are. Another place that you can see some more information on these waivers is there's a website called navigatelife.texas.org. There's a lot of information on the waivers out there on that website. It's just a good website to look at, navigatelife.texas.org. Dee, if you want to put that in the chat box, you can. But so for CLASS, this is going to give home and community-based supports to children and adults with related conditions that are, and there's basically over 200 related conditions like cerebral palsy, spina bifida. The related condition must have occurred prior to the child turning age 22. So that's the CLASS waiver. All of these waivers, what's interesting is all of these waivers have different budgets tied to them. And today we actually will send you a spreadsheet too that kind of explains the different different waivers and their budgets, and it kind of looks like the spreadsheet's outdated, but it's the most recent updated one, and I believe it was updated in 2018. So then we have the deaf, blind with multiple disabilities. This gives service for children and adults who are deaf, blind, and have a related condition that leads to deaf blindness, who also have another disability. So this is, fewer people obviously qualify for this because not everybody is deaf and blind with another disability, okay? So that's the qualifications for that one. Then we have the HCS. We hear a lot about the HCS waiver pretty commonly. This is going to give services and supports to children and adults with an intellectual disability or a related condition who live with their families in their own homes or small group homes with no more than 4 people. And intellectual disability is typically defined as IQ of 70 or below. And we've also seen 75 or below with multiple diagnoses. Then we have the medically dependent children program, MDCP. This gives services to children and adults who are 20 and younger who are medically fragile as an alternative to receiving services in a nursing home. So typically the medical fragile diagnosis is, we see kids that maybe they have a trach, they might have a G-tube, they might be on a ventilator. We've definitely seen some that are on the MDCP program that aren't quite as severe, but it is a more, severe than, let's say that the diagnosis is autism and there's no other, medical equipment or medically fragile diagnosis that goes along with that. So then what we have is we have the STAR Plus Home and Community-Based Services, HCBS. This gives services to adults over the age of 21 to keep them in their community and not a nursing home facility. And I just want to talk about that for a second, because there's really been a shift in the mindset for care for individuals with disabilities. 30 and 40 years ago, there was this mindset that anybody with a disability should just simply be institutionalized. That's all there is to it. And it's really wrong thinking. And there's been a lot of change and paradigm shift in the community. And what it is now believed is basically just the opposite, that our loved ones with disability are going to be best. They're going to be at their best when they're in their home or their own community and receiving services in their community as opposed to a residential living facility. Now, having said that, there are, cases where the residential living facility is the best bet. Maybe there are aging parents and they can no longer care for the loved one. There's a lot of reasons why and when residential might be relative, and there are waivers that cover that as well. But I just wanted to mention that kind of the shift in how these waivers, came about and why they are the way they are. So the Texas Home Living, this is going to give services to children and adults with an intellectual disability or related condition who live in their own home or their family's home. The Youth Empowerment Services, this is the YES waiver, the 1915C Medicaid program that gives home and community-based services to children under the age of 19 with serious mental and emotional behavioral difficulties. That has to be the primary, okay? So like if an individual has CP or Down syndrome and they have the serious mental, emotional, and behavioral difficulties, they may not qualify for the YES waiver. But I want to just take a pause for a minute and talk about the YES waiver, because a lot of counties in the state of Texas, there is no waiting list for this YES waiver. This YES waiver is a wraparound program. And I always talk about the alphabet soup that comes with mental health diagnoses. We've got ADD, ADHD, OCD, ODD. We have the DMDD, the disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, bipolar, borderline personality disorder. Another fit for this particular waiver, at-risk kids, at risk of being placed outside of the home. Maybe they're runaways, maybe they have drug problems, maybe they've had issues at school. And it's not all one or the other or all, but this is an example. And this is just a wraparound program that provides services to your student, and it also provides services to the family. They have weekly therapy. There's family therapists. There's like a family liaison that kind of helps out to make things a little bit better in the home. But then there's also other services that are included with this waiver, and it's specifically tailored to your student. But they might get art therapy or music therapy or equine therapy. Those are some examples. There's a lot of different types of therapy, but it's designed to keep them out of a mental health institution and to keep them in home and community-based services. And the services usually last about a year. I've seen them extended. I definitely saw them extended quite a bit during COVID, but this is a good one to check on. And I just mention this because I know that a lot of people, as families with kids with disabilities, we had issues prior to COVID. And a lot of issues were made worse with this, the social isolation and other things like that. So I just know that there's a lot of families we talk to every week that are in need of services. Your child may have problems bigger than a 50-minute weekly or a biweekly session with a psychologist or psychiatrist. And so if that is you, it doesn't matter if you have insurance or you think you make too much money. The qualification for this YES waiver is based off of the child's income and assets, not yours. So if you think you don't qualify, that's not the case on this. So definitely check that out. So sorry for the sidebar, but I just like to tell people about this because most people don't know, and it's basically the only one in Texas that doesn't have, a really, really long waiting list. So then we have our community first choice. This allows states to provide home and community-based attendance services and supports to Medicaid recipients with disabilities. It will help with activities of daily living, health-related tasks, hands-on assistance, supervision, or cueing. And it's really designed to help help them learn how to care for themselves and live independently. So this is a good one as well. Okay. So when we're, talking about, the services that are available in waivers, and we kind of talked about some of them already, we've got adaptive aids, financial management services, supported employment, employment assistance. And I just want to take a pause there. We do have entire webinars on supported employment and employment assistance for individuals with disabilities. And if you're just taking notes, it's not on the slides today. There are programs for our kids. We've got vocational rehab, VR, you may have heard of it called. We've got pre-ET, summer earn and learn. There's a lot of programs. There's internships. So just you can check out our YouTube channel. We'll partner with Workforce Commission, Workforce Solutions in the future and have future webinars, but we definitely do have webinars out there. So if you have a child that is between ages 14 to 22, they have a disability that could be a potential impediment to employment, just know that there are services out there. They have state and federally funded dollars for these programs, and these programs are really, really great. So do check that out. Most schools, I know it's summer and the schools are out for the summer, but most schools do have a VR liaison or consultant with the school, VR counselor. And then also you can self-referral. You can start your VR. There is there's a website where you can start your own VR and you can refer your student to that. So just learn about that if you haven't heard about it. It's a great program, and it's designed to help them find competitive employment, not underemployment. It's designed to close their gaps on the impediment to employment that maybe they have as a result of their disability. So some of these waivers will do minor home modifications. They're going to provide respite care. Services in all but MDCP, children's Medicaid will include already. We've got professional therapies such as PT, OT, speech therapy, and again, a lot of these therapies, if you can think of it, I mean, we've seen aquatic therapy, equine therapy, art therapy, music therapy. If you can think it up, there's a therapy for that. We've seen feeding clinics or feeding therapy and things like that, depending on the disability. We've got unlimited prescriptions, dental, and nursing. So these are services that are provided in these waivers. Some other waivers services could provide transportation to and from doctor's appointments, residential services, equine therapy we kind of talked about, Dayhab, or like some of those transition programs, as well as nursing. So some families will come to me and they'll say, we have private insurance, we have adequate savings to fund the trust for our loved one. Why should we even care about Medicaid? Mm-hmm. And so the reality of it is, and so one can argue we don't need Medicaid, we don't need this, or we don't need that, but all of these waivers are dependent on Medicaid eligibility. So you want to keep your loved one Medicaid eligible. Some of these budgets, which you'll see in the spreadsheet that we're going to send you, depending on the level of need of the individual, some of these budgets are as big as $340,000 a year. So even if you're affluent and you make a lot of money and you've got enough money to fund the trust, having a waiver in the future that's going to pay for some attendant services or respite services is going to help. It's going to help a lot. And then we also have to remember that as parents, we're aging. So we might be good and well now, but we might not always be. And so if we have a child that has care needs, that's going to have care needs for the rest of their life, not just ours, that is the why behind it. I just wanted to answer that because that's kind of a common question that comes up a lot. So waiver general eligibility. So most waivers are for all ages, for the exception of the MDCP and STAR Plus. And for financial eligibility for all waivers, for the exception of Texas Home Living, is basically 300% of SSI. And it does not look at parental income. So right now, the monthly SSI amount, some of you your child may already be getting it. They may be adult kids and what have you, but right now the SSI amount is $841 per month. So 300% of that SSI is $25.23. So what this means is that from an income perspective, unearned and earned income, your loved one could have income up to $25.23 per month and still qualify for these waivers. Okay. But the individual does have to meet the functional eligibility and criteria for the specific waiver. Now, one thing that we hear on a pretty regular basis is, I don't know if my child is going to qualify. And what I say to that is put them on the list anyway, okay? Because remember, the list is long, right? So, because the eligibility is not determined when they get on the list, the eligibility is determined when they come up to the top of the wait list. So that's when you're going to get your forms to fill out and to verify your eligibility. And there's no harm or no loss in not being, eligible. Good for you that the disability is under control and you don't qualify for whatever reason. Another thing that I wanted to mention here, some mistakes that I've seen families make over the years is they've been on the waiting list for a very, very long time, and they really just didn't even know what the list was for. And then they come up on the waiting list and then they tell the person, well, I don't think we need that right now. And then they went back down to the bottom of the waiting list. I don't recommend doing that. I don't recommend starting over on the waiting list if you can help it. I mean, if you truly don't need it and you've truly arrived and you don't think you're ever going to need it, then that would be one reason to say that you're not going to need it. But I would say I would try to make sure that my child stays on the list and really consider the eligibility and go through the process whenever they come up. Okay. So does this mean 25, 23 before taxes? Yeah, it's actually the gross earnings is what they're looking at on that. So I did see that question. Okay, so moving on. So we've got two funding paths for the waivers. You know, we've talked about the interest list. The wait list is kind of a first come, first serve. Statewide, the wait can be as long as 14 years, and that's on the slide. We're being nice, but more recently we've heard that the wait list is a little bit longer than that. You know, it's promoting independence. It's designed to prevent or divert individuals from institution, and also it addresses crisis. We're going to talk more about crisis in a moment, but it basically also helps individuals to move or transition from institutions. So for people that were in an institution that are going to move into a semi-independent or independent living arrangement in the future, and we do see that, we've definitely seen that over the years as well. Okay, so one of the main questions that comes up all the time, we keep talking about this waiting list. And how do we get on it? So first things first, what you need to know is that there are multiple waiting lists and you need to be on all of them. Okay, so a lot of times people tell me, Allison, we are in all the waiting lists, when in fact, they are on the waiting interest list that the local intellectual developmental disability authority runs. So whether you call it a LIDA or you call it a LIDA, the local intellectual disability authority maintains the list for HCS, Texas Home Living and Community First Choice. Okay, so our local intellectual developmental disability authorities in Texas are organized by county. Okay, so you're going to get this slide and you're going to get this this link. This is going to tell you who your local authority is. Okay, so we have all kinds of different local authorities. Like for instance, Houston is the Harris Center. You know, every single one of them has a different name. A lot of them used to be called MHMR, and some of them are still called MHMR. Some of them have changed. Many of them have changed their names. So this link right here is going to allow you to put it in your browser. It'll pop up and it's going to ask you to put your zip code in, and then it's going to tell you exactly who your local authority is. So if you live in one county and then you move to another county, your local authority changes and you need to call the new county and have your case transferred from the old county to the new county. You're not going to lose your place in line. So if you put yourself in line all these years ago, you're not going to lose your place in line. But you do need to have the case transferred. So the next thing that you need to know, so we've basically talked about your local authority. So if you have called your local authority and you've put your child on the list, they're basically on the list for HCS, Texas Home Living, and CFC. They are not on all of the list. Okay, so class, MDCP class and DBMD have a separate phone number for their waiting list. So from that perspective, you're going to want to call this 800 number and you're going to want to add your child to that list. And then there's even a separate phone number for the Star Plus waiver. So basically there's 3 different doors you should walk through to make sure that your child is truly on all the lists, not just the one that the local authority has. And so I see something in the chat box. Can we view this at a later time? Yes. Anybody that registered for today's webinar is going to get a copy of today's slides, and they're also going to get a recording of today's presentation. So you will get these slides with these links in here as well. So this is probably one of the very most important slides on here. So that way you can, check and see where you are on the list. So one thing I always say, which I find interesting in this day and age of technology and what have you, you would think that there would be like a website that we could create a username and password and we could put our kids on the list. And then we could kind of go into our login and kind of see where they are on the list. But that does not exist, okay? It is all controlled by these 800 numbers and your local authority. So you actually truly do have to call your local authority to get on the list. I hope that updates soon to where there is, more access for parents to, check the status without actually having to call the local authority. But that is the way that it stands right now. Dee, how are we on questions right now?
had one question that I saw. Let me check real quick. Yeah, Erica Warren said, does this mean 2,523 before taxes?
Yes, and that is it's the gross number is, yeah, I think we hit that one. Let's check the Q&A.
Yes.
I see one. The list are state numbers waiting, even though the local authority has a number. That is what you said, correct. And so it is the state numbers. And so, yes, your local authority has you on the list, but how many people are moving on the list has to do as a state as a whole. And how does the Yes Waiver program get the child on Medicaid? And they actually apply. So there is a phone number when you call your local authority. The local authority manages the Yes Waiver, so that on that previous slide that we were talking about of how to find your local authority, they're who manages the Yes Waiver. There's an intake coordinator, and they will meet with you and get all of your information, and they will actually help the family apply for Medicaid along with the Yes Waiver application is basically how that works. Let's see. If a child did the Yes Waiver at a younger age, not knowing autism was the real issue, can they do it again? It was at the beginning, and yes, they can. I have seen people go back into the Yes Waiver. It's up until age 19 years old. So it has to do, I'm not the authority on approving Yes Waivers or anything like that. You do have to work with your local authority. But they have an intake questionnaire, and if the issues arise again, a lot of the mental health issues are a cycle. There are a lot of families, it's a cycle, and we have phases of doing great and not so great, and maybe hit those teenage years and they're a little bumpy. So I think it's definitely worth checking into. How do we get in touch with our caseworker? They never return our calls. So with your local authority, you can try to be escalated to a supervisor. You can call the main line and mention that they never return your calls. A lot of times what I've seen with some of the local authorities is that there is sometimes a high turnover rate. We definitely saw a higher turnover rate during COVID. And that's true with VR and some of the other programs too, as far as some of the counselors, but they're probably overworked and underpaid, and there is some cycle of employees. So don't give up. Do call, do ask to speak to a supervisor, do get escalated, and then there are other organizations that can also intervene and get involved and help. One organization that we are familiar with that does a great job of advocating and helping when you're kind of hitting a brick wall is Family to Family Network. So if you don't know them, check them out, Family to Family Network. They're a very helpful organization if you're running into some of those brick walls. Okay, so, and then we have another question is, if you receive child support, even for life, are deducted from SSI and the person paid the balance, has this changed? We are going to talk about that in a minute. So yes, there is a deduction for child support that continues post 18, but we definitely will talk about that in a moment. So one of the things that I want to talk about, because we've talked about the long waiting list, and for a lot of us, it kind of feels like hopeless because it's so long and so far away. But there is a such thing as crisis diversion slots. So if you or your loved one is in crisis, you can contact your local authority, tell them you'd like to request an HCS crisis diversion waiver. What is a crisis? Okay. An example of crisis is that the individual is a threat to themselves or others. They're dangerous. A crisis could be that a caregiver has died, or a caregiver has been diagnosed with something that is going to affect their ability to provide caregiving services unless there's intervention. The individual is at risk of being placed at, outside of the home. So those are some examples. I've seen all kinds of examples. We had 2 families that were granted crisis waivers last year. Your local authority is going to be your first point of contact for a crisis diversion slot. Some people have hit a brick wall with their local authority, or felt like they were going round and round, beating their head against the ground, against the wall, kind of getting anywhere. But there are other places that can help you with, as well, if you truly are in that zone of crisis diversion. There is an organization out of Austin, and they serve the entire state, and they have boots on the ground in most major cities across the state, like the big cities. It's called Every Child. So Every Child is a good organization, and I have found them to be helpful in getting that intervention and getting that crisis waiver approved. So just know about that. Okay, so Dee, how are we on questions now?
We do have one other, it's not really a question, but a comment. It says client homelessness is a crisis.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, homelessness is a crisis. There are a lot of crises, and we've got a lot of issues on the mental health side of the world right now. I've heard from multiple families in the last few weeks that had crisis and hospital intervention. In the example of an individual being a threat to themselves or others, where they sat in the ER for 2 days, there were no beds, and on the mental health facilities didn't have any beds either. So what happened? Oh yeah, they went home. So we've got some big crises going on. It is real. I mean, I know of 2 families in the last 3 weeks that has happened to, and scary. It is scary, but there is help. We've seen the ARC of Texas get involved on these crisis waivers as well. So just know that there is help out there and that they do exist. So the PASRR, the diversion and transition from nursing facilities or specialized services. So there is some help for that, but we see less need for that as it stands right now, because a lot of people are in the home and community-based services. So someone says, we have a client that has autism and that just lost his mom. Would this qualify for the HCS crisis diversion waiver? Yes, it is a good possibility that we've seen like diagnoses such as cancer, stroke, kind of debilitating illnesses diagnosed in a caregiver, where the individual qualified for crisis. And then we've also, definitely seen death of a caregiver. So these are all, I always say, don't miss the crisis, right? Because when there's a 17-year waiting list, I hope you never have a crisis. I hope you never qualify for the crisis diversion spot. But I'm just telling you, as parents, don't miss the crisis, because the crisis may be how you get the waiver long before the 17 years is kind of the basic, thing that we just want to share there. Okay, so let me just check the chat box. Okay, I think we've answered. All of that. So yeah, that family definitely needs to check with the local authority and get that ball rolling. Check with Every Child. You can put that in the chat box too, Dee, if you want to grab the Every Child that is in Austin that I mentioned, as well as the ARC of Texas.
Okay.
So those are all places that you can get help. But your first place that you have to start with your local authority. And all of the local authorities have crisis lines. So when you go to that website, you put in your zip code, you find out who your local authority is. On their website, they're going to specifically have a crisis phone number that runs 24/7. So just know that exists out there as well. Okay. So when it comes to special needs planning, how do we get started? One of the things that we talk about is, your situation is specialized, okay? Or the families that you serve, their situation is specialized. So just like, if you have a cardiac problem or if you have a cancer problem, we don't go see a PCP, and we definitely don't go see a foot doctor, okay? So when we're dealing with special needs, individuals with disabilities that have care needs or possibly could have care needs for the rest of their life, not just ours, you want to work with somebody that is specialized in special needs. And the reason for that is there are a lot of rules. There's a lot of things that kind of dotting the I's and crossing the T's that we need to do to make sure that our kids maintain eligibility for Medicaid, for state and federally funded programs. We don't want to accidentally disqualify for those things. There are, such things as having money in the right buckets and not having money in the individual's name. And if we are going to leave money to our loved one for their future care, that it needs to go to a special needs trust. We're going to talk more about those types of things. But another thing that I like to talk about is understanding the difference between a special needs planner and a special needs attorney. We're the special needs planner side of the house. We're nationally certified as Social Security advisors, members of the Special Needs Planning Academy. We are nuanced in special needs. That's what our practice does. We're able to do future care cost estimates. Families come to us and they say, we want to plan for the worst. We hope for the best, but we want to plan for the worst. And we just don't even know how much do we need to set aside for the future care of our loved one? How much do we need to fund the special needs trust? We want to plan for that. We're able to do future care cost estimates, and we're also able to do the comprehensive plan, because ultimately our kids' care is going to come out of our budget, and also our retirement, 25 to 35 years, is going to come out of our budget too. So we're able to tie the future care cost estimates into your own overall financial plan and retirement plan, and kind of look at it from a dollars and cents perspective, and what knobs do you need to turn now. My advice to folks is to get started sooner versus later, because the little, incremental changes that you make now, like I said, just turning the knobs a little bit, will make a difference on whether or not you arrive there when you want to retire and still have enough to fund the trust. But the special needs attorney, what do they do? Because a lot of times people call us and they say, I need guardianship, I need a special needs trust, I need this, I need that. Well, we don't do that. We're the money, okay? So we're the financial side, we're the money in the right buckets. We're how do you apply for SSI and Medicaid? How do you get on those waivers lists? How do I get going with VR? We're going to help you and kind of direct you in all of those types of things in those future care cost estimates. But the special needs attorney, there's a paper, there's a legal documents. You need them too. In the legal documents, some of our families, their kids, they may be applying for guardianship or partial guardianship. In Texas, we have the supported decision-making agreement with power of attorney, healthcare power of attorney. And these attorneys will kind of walk you through. You don't have to know what you need. They will walk you through it. They will talk to you. They're going to do a lot of listening. They want to understand more about your child. But in the state of Texas, it's the most appropriate and least restrictive. That's the law, right? So some of our loved ones with disabilities may definitively need guardianship, and others may get by just fine with a power of attorney, healthcare power of attorney, and supported decision-making agreement. But these attorneys will help walk you through this. Because your situation is specialized, we do not recommend families do it yourself on legal documents such as wills and trusts and things like that. There is specific wording that goes into these documents, and you want to work with a true professional that's what they do, and they are nuanced and special needs. Because if you don't, some of that wording that might need to be in a first party special needs trust, for instance, might not be there, and that trust may fail to qualify for a special needs trust in the eyes of the Social Security Administration. So these are all things that are important. We partner with attorneys all across the state of Texas. So, we're happy to make a referral to a qualified attorney in your area if you need to get these things taken care of and need to look at it. Okay, Dee, how are we on questions?
We do have a couple of questions.
Sure.
So Shannon Crider says, interesting. So if moving homes has previously caused a crisis, an acute inpatient to 3 months of rehab, is it safe to assume a crisis can be predicted? What can be done? No one listens until it's a crisis.
Yeah, that's valid. I think that the state of the services in our state right now, and sometimes they don't listen when it is a crisis. Those two families I mentioned, in the last 3 weeks with the mental health crisis, it's tough, right? And where it further gets tough is if there's not an intellectual disability, if the IQ isn't below 70. So again, I don't get to decide who's going to qualify for a crisis or who doesn't. But what I will tell you this, it's worth exploring to the nth degree and getting the local authority involved and every child involved in the ARC and whoever you need to until they definitively tell you no, and here's the reasons why, and you still have the right to appeal. So I guess that's what I would say. And I know it's sad. It's sad as a parent, as a caregiver, as a professional. to see this, and it is hard. And then especially when we're, we did have a family in the last year. It was an adult with an intellectual disability who lost both of his parents in a short period of time, and the next of kin was out of state, right? And so, so that was, an example. So we see a lot of this, but the thing is you're here today and you're kind of educating yourself. And what we want to do is to equip you with the tools and resources that you need to know how to navigate. And you know what I found is, as a parent of special needs, guess what? I know other parents with special needs. We know people in our similar circles. Of course, I work in it professionally as well. But also passing stuff along and information along is also helpful. And again, that is why really we have our YouTube channel out there. So we do have the Consolidated Planning Group YouTube channel, and it'll be at the end of this presentation that you can subscribe to for free. There's no charge for that. And all of our webinars live out there. So we have a lot of webinars designed to educate and put the tools and resources you need into a variety of topics as it relates to special needs. It could be college planning for special needs. It could be VR. It could be what do I need to know about special needs trust, or how do I get started with the guardianship process? I mean, there's a whole bunch of, there's probably 150 webinars out there. So you can kind of look and see for the topics that might be relevant to you, but feel free to share that as well. What else do we have, Dee?
We do have another question. What is the benefit of guardianship for the parent? And I do want to say something real quick. Before this
Sure.
webinar ends, I will be popping up a quick poll for our evaluation purposes, and that helps us to maintain our funding to provide services for free. And then we do have a couple of questions in the chat as well.
Okay, so as far as the guardianship is concerned, that is going to give the parent rights to make decisions for the individual that cannot make decisions for themselves, basically. So, it's a slippery slope, because again, with Texas is the least restrictive, most appropriate for the individual, which they refer to as the WARD, W-A-R-D. But basically, if the individual does not have the capacity to understand what they are signing as far as a power of attorney or a healthcare power of attorney, that's when the attorney will talk to you more about alternatives, right? And those alternatives could be partial guardianship. So a full guardianship takes all the rights away of the individual. So a lot of families don't want to do that. They won't be able to vote. They won't be able to drive a car, but some of our loved ones are never going to be able to do that anyway. Some of our loved ones have intellectual disabilities. They don't have the capacity to sign. Some of them don't have the physical capacity to sign or understand what they're signing. So again, I think the main thing to understand is that an attorney is going to talk to you about each one of those, and our webinars on our YouTube channel talks about each of the alternatives and what that looks like, and how you go about doing that. So you don't, when you sit down with an attorney to talk about this, because I know it's an emotional thought, right? So if we've got kids that are transitioning, they're coming around the bend to 18, or maybe they're over 18 and we haven't addressed this yet. They're going to help walk you through that, so you don't have to know everything. Okay, how are additional questions?
Let me see who this is. Machado Letty said, is it best to go through you guys before an attorney? I'm assuming that's correct.
So, a lot of times people come to us before an attorney because on the financial side, they don't know how much they need to fund the trust. They don't know over the overall financial picture. And it kind of just depends on where you are, where you are in the journey. But, you need both. And a lot of times after our initial consultation, we'll say, okay, here's kind of the direction that you can get going, because both of them is a process, right? So, but we, when we're meeting with families, we're really talking to them about what have you already done so far? What's important to you? We're kind of listening. A lot of the families that come to us say, we're hopeful and we're optimistic. My child isn't there yet. I mean, I have one that's 18, that's where I'm at. Okay. And so, but we've just got to plan accordingly. So kind of the either way, but the bottom line is where we come from is you can have the special needs trust, right? But if it's not funded or you don't know where the funding is coming from, it's not always even worth the paper that it's written on, right? So it's kind of a two-sided coin there.
Okay, and I believe we may have had one other question. How many times can they do the IQ exam? Does it change with therapy, or will it always be the same?
I've seen it change over the years. It's not usually huge swings, but I've also seen kids on the autism spectrum and the ADHD, with the ADHD diagnosis that I think sometimes the results are skewed, I guess is what I'm saying. If we're having a problem focusing and kind of staying where we are, we're having severe anxiety about doing the testing to begin with. But usually when you guys start doing the neuropsych testing and some of the other testing, they've got the Woodcock-Johnson and the Wechsler. There's all kinds of different tests out there that they do. I think typically they don't want to see it done more than I want to say 2 or 3 years apart. Like they don't want it done every single year, but yeah, certainly that there is updated testing that gets done.
And then is there a consultation fee for your services?
We have an initial consultation that is always free. So there's no cost involved in kind of getting to know us and us getting to know you to determine if it makes sense for us to talk going forward. So kind of moving on, because I do want to hit on the SSI and kind of some of the other factors before we run out of time, and I want you to have time to do your survey as well. When you're kind of, starting the planning process, we're going to want you to gather all the planning documents. What does that look like? This is your Social Security statements, your full earnings records, any savings, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, 401ks, 403bs, any planning documents that you already have in place, wills, trusts, etc. This would be life insurance or in disability insurance, maybe that you have through your employer, maybe what you have outside of your employer. Those are some examples of some of the documents that we're going to want to look at. Also, in the planning process, we talk about developing a letter of intent, and we do have an entire webinar on this. And this is just basically a family love letter. As parents, we know, I always say that we have forgot more than anybody will ever know about our kids, right? But if I'm incapacitated or I'm no longer here on earth, does somebody else know this? And where do they get it? Where do they get their hands on this information? I want the transition to be as smooth as possible. So a letter of intent kind of goes along with your legal documents. And we have a template for that, but the letter of intent is just basically going to kind of talk about all the likes, dislikes, diagnoses, medications, physicians, schools, what makes your, child, thrive, what makes them melt down, what have you. It's actually a 20-page document, so it's pretty intense. But this is where, if something happened to you, you want somebody else to know this, and it's important for all families that have a loved one with a disability, especially if there's an intellectual disability, and especially if the kiddo is nonverbal. So these are all kind of things to be thinking about. But we want you to think about how you hope things will look for your special needs child, but more importantly, how you hope your vision for your own future looks, because our future looks different. If we've got a child that's going to have care needs for the rest of their life, not just ours, we don't just retire and sail off into the sunset and travel and just do whatever we want. Our life looks a little bit different, but what we found that is you got to find some balance there. There has to be some respite care. There needs to be some help and services, so that way that there's balance for the entire family. Because what happens, as a lot of parents do, they take on the world and they take on everything, and their own health declines as a result of being, Superman or Superwoman. To the family, we don't find that balance, and that doesn't help your loved one. So that kind of shortens your time frame of when and how long you can be a caregiver. So we want you to think about those things. So the big thing that I want to talk about now is kind of future funding. We have entire presentations. In fact, Monday the 18th. We do have a presentation with Andy Hardwick with the Social Security Administration, Monday the 18th. It's going to go from 12 to 1, and it's his last one. He's been with the Social Security Administration for 40 years, and this will be his last presentation before he retires. So if you need help on this, attend that webinar or watch the playback on it on our YouTube channel. But We want to preserve the eligibility for state and federally funded programs, SSI and Social Security. SSI is a means-based program. It's $841 a month. It comes along with Medicaid. So SSI, Supplemental Security Income, comes along with Medicaid. It's a means-based program. In a nutshell, and I'm totally summarizing this, we have entire presentations about this. Excuse me. Assets less than $2,000, you can have one house and one car. So a lot of our kids don't qualify for SSI prior to turning 18. Once they turn 18, it's based off of their assets and their income, not yours, okay? So we want to make sure that we've got money in the right buckets prior to them turning 18. What are the right buckets? So they can have an account, as long as there's less than $2,000 in there, they can have that. But if they have money more than $2,000, it needs to be in a special needs trust or an ABLE account. Okay, and we can help you guys get set up with an ABLE account. There's some other things online that you can look at for that as well. But for Social Security, that is a worker-based program. We pay into the Social Security system. So one day when we either become disabled or we retire, that it will pay us a benefit. A lot of our kids won't work. And if they don't work, then they don't pay into that system. But there is a program called Childhood Disability Benefits, and it was formerly called DAC, Disabled Adult Child, where your child whose disability started prior to age 22 can be covered under your record. So when you become disabled or retired and turn on your Social Security, your disabled adult child can qualify for up to 50% of your record. So if you get $4,000 a month, then your child will get $2,000 a month. Basically, they'll switch over from SSI to RSDI, and after 2 years, once they've turned 18, after 2 years, they will be eligible for Medicare, and actually they'll end up being dual eligible. So I know that's a mouthful and it's a lot to take in, but again, we do have, entire presentations that really kind of talk and go over the ins and outs of all this. It is a lot, it kind of feels overwhelming, but just know if your loved one, I've had families before that have contacted us and they're angry. They're angry because their child is denied for SSI. And clearly their child is disabled. Like, how in the world could they be disqualified for SSI? And it's simple. The child's a minor and it's based off of your income and assets, and you have too much. So if you have more than one house, if you have more than one car, and if you're a married couple and you got more than $3,000 in your name, your child's not going to qualify. But what a lot of people don't understand is that it changes at age 18 and that you should reapply, because they're still mad that they were denied to begin with and it was such a pain that they don't want to reapply. And so I just want to encourage you, if that was you, that you do need to re-examine this once your child has turned 18. As far as an ABLE account is concerned, you can contribute $16,000 a year and an additional $12,880 if working, but the disability had to begin prior to age 26. A 529A is a tax-free account. It's a way to put tax-free money out, tax-free distributions, as long as they're the distributions are used for a qualified disability expense. So what is a qualified disability expense anyway? And basically, it's pretty broad, and if it can be considered as achieving a better life for an individual with a disability, you can pay for it out of an ABLE account. So one of the things that somebody mentioned earlier, and I wanted to address this again because it is important. When you work, so like say your child is working, when you work and you're getting SSI, your work, their income, it reduces the SSI. And typically how that works is if they're working, they're not going to count the first $85. So, in the example that they've made $200, right? So of the $200, they're not going to count the first 85. They're going to take $115. They're going to divide by 2, and that amount will be reduced from the SSI, okay? So that's basically how that would work with working. Similar with child support. So one of the things that happens in Texas in the case of divorce is oftentimes when there is a loved one with special needs, that child support will often continue, not always, and I'm not a divorce attorney and I don't play one on TV, but a lot of times the child support will continue post age 18 for the disabled individual. But if that child support is not redirected to a first-party special needs trust, it's going to be counted against them for SSI, and it may either reduce or completely eliminate the SSI. So if that's you, you find yourself divorced, you're getting child support, it's going to continue post age 18 for your loved one, then you want to start the process of getting it moved to the special needs trust, to the first party special needs trust, which means you're going to have to establish a first party special needs trust. And it also means that you're going to have to engage an attorney that will get a court order signed off on by a judge to have it changed to the first party special needs trust. So thank you for bringing that up. It's a common thing, and it definitely is an issue. Another thing that people ask a lot is basically, why do I need an ABLE account and why do I need a special needs trust? One reason is the ABLE account can pay for food and shelter. So SSI is designed for food and shelter. An ABLE account can pay for food and shelter without a reduction to SSI. A special needs trust can also pay for food and shelter, but there would be a 1/3 reduction to SSI. So I think the 1/3 reduction in that example would, basically, take it down to the 561. It's just going to reduce it. So the bottom line is, you can pay for food and shelter out of the account where the SSI comes to. You can pay for food and shelter out of the ABLE account and not have a reduction in SSI. And you can still pay for food and shelter out of the special needs trust, but you just have to know that there is going to be a reduction in the monthly SSI amount. Okay, so I am going to look for some questions here. Do I need an attorney?
I'm
sorry?
I was just going to say there are a couple in the chat.
Okay, I'm going to look. Let's see. So do I need an attorney for myself for the full guardianship of my son with Down syndrome? Yes. A guardianship is not do-it-yourselfer. And there is also a document, a medical document that the attorney will provide that you'll have to get filled out by their physician. So that is required. Let's see. And our YouTube channel is Consolidated Planning Group. It's out there on YouTube, and it's going to be in a link at the end of this presentation. Okay. Somebody said you have to ask for it. I see somebody is a paralegal on here. Most family lawyers don't know. And one of the things, and maybe you're kind of talking about the child support to be redirected to a first party special needs trust. That is true. What she's saying, there are some divorce attorneys that are nuanced in special needs, and we can make a referral. But if you're working with an attorney that is not nuanced in special needs, they can consult other ones. But you do need to be aware of that, that you do need to ask for some of these things. It's not something that somebody just automatically suggests that you have that done. And I'm of the opinion that it's better to get it done on the front end as opposed to go on the back end and correct it 5 or 6 years later, or down, when you're down to the wire when they're turning 18 or things like that. And this person says this is for the child support for life. You do have to ask for that. And again, I think it depends on the attorney that you're working with and if they have worked with a lot of special needs divorces or not. So I do think that is worthy of mentioning, but it's also worthy of consideration too, because if you have a child that's going to have care needs for the rest of their life, okay, they're always going to be dependent. It is fair and reasonable to consider child support continuing. So just know that that's a thing. And we actually have a webinar on special needs divorce, and we have various attorneys that we know that are kind of specialized and nuanced in that, and they can definitely help you with that. So thank you for putting that out there. And that's the other side too, when it comes to the special needs attorneys. Again, all attorneys aren't created equally, just like financial advisors, they're not created equally. In fact, less than 1% of financial advisors in the United States, less than 1% of them are nuanced in special needs, okay? So when it comes to attorneys, there's a lot of attorneys out there, and they're very smart, and they all went to law school, and they're very intelligent, but they're very good at what they do. So maybe they're a contract lawyer, maybe they're, there's all different types of attorneys, but we really suggest, working with an estate planning attorney that does have a background in special needs. So then we have another question. So when do I request child support to continue past age 18? I did all of the divorce and everything independently. That's certainly up to you on whether or not it's worth it. You've got to kind of weigh the legal costs that come along with that, because there certainly are some that come along with that as well. And I would just say that, you can kind of address that anytime, prior to the individual turning 18. So I know that we're here and it's 1 o'clock. And so we're kind of wrapping up here. And these are just some of the things that we have webinars on. We've kind of talked on some of these topics, but these all live out there on our YouTube channel. So we hope that you will join us in the future on our future webinars. And like I said, if you're marking it down, definitely mark down the webinar for Monday with Andy Hardwick, and that is definitely one that I would say is totally worth your time. It'll go an hour, but it is, if you're wondering about SSI, SSDI, qualifying, all that kind of stuff, you've got questions on that, that's going to be a great one to attend. I always just like to say, meet our team. We've got several staff that are not pictured here, but we work on a collaborative team here at Consolidated Planning Group, and we stand ready to help you navigate. I know that when we have this many people on a webinar, we have very specific situations or very specific questions that a lot of people, they don't want to ask in a public chat box or whatever, but reach out. We're happy, happy to connect with you. So this here is a calendar link. So if you're interested in scheduling a free personalized consultation, you can take a picture of this link and it'll go to our calendar, and you can get on our calendar kind of to chat with us more about your specific situation and your needs. We've got our Facebook page and our YouTube channel that we mentioned, and we certainly look forward to partnering with you in the future. I've got a little bit after 1. Do you want to take just 1 or 2 more questions, Dee?
That would be fine. And we did have someone that asked if these presentations are available in Spanish.
They're not. And we have people ask that all the time, but apparently on our YouTube channel, there is a way on the YouTube channel that you can convert it to Spanish or something. So I'm sorry for that, but they're not.
Okay, let me see. My son is getting RSDI. He is 17. Will it stop at 18?
He'll have to reapply. So if the kid's getting RSDI because basically he was a minor, typically what's going to happen is you're going to get a letter and they're going to ask if he's going to stay in school or not. They're going to ask if he's disabled, and you need to reapply. You're going to have to apply for SSI, SSI, and Medicaid at that time. So, and I would start the process. So one person said, is it better to apply for SSI before or after 18? For the most part, it's 18, because if you have more than $2,000 in your name, more than one house, more than one car, you're just basically wasting your time. You're not going to qualify because it's a means-based program. So if you have too much money, it's based off of your assets prior to them turning 18. They're just going to deny them. So I suggest scheduling for the month that they turn 18. So if their birthday is July 15th, I would try to schedule any time after July 15th for their SSI. They have a protected filing tool where you can file online. They take applications over the phone. Most of the Social Security offices are backed up. It's a long time before you can get an appointment. So if you have a child that's going to be turning 18 in the next couple of months, I would go ahead and call and try to get the appointment for the month, the day after they turn 18, or sometime the week after they turn 18. So that would be my suggestion. So if from an asset perspective, you have less than $2,000, you don't make any money, and you have, one car and one house, then maybe you consider applying. But if that's not you, it's pointless to apply for SSI because you will get denied because of the means-based program. Well, I would like to, I do see actually one more that I want to, two. Does the Special Needs Trust or an ABLE account disqualify for getting SSI? Absolutely not. The Special Needs Trust and the ABLE account are the two specific places that you can have money that will not be counted against you for SSI and Medicaid purposes. And then someone says, I have a nice home on 10 acres. I want to leave to my daughter with Down syndrome. Will there be a way to leave it to her in money in a separate account to pay the yearly taxes without her losing income? And the answer is a special needs trust. So that is basically how you can do that. You guys have asked really great questions today. So thank you guys. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for doing Dee's survey as well. And again, if we can be of any additional assistance to you, feel free to reach out, and I'm sure we'll partner with Dee again. So thanks so much, everyone. Everybody have a great afternoon.
Thank you so much,
Bye.
Allison. I appreciate you so much for providing this.
Absolutely. Thank you. Take care.